Okay. So, welcome back, everybody. Happy New Year and all that. I always think it's interesting at the end of a break like this, as we get back into things. And obviously, we need to take a bit slowly, a bit carefully from a physical point of view. But it's also very interesting, I think, because ideally what we do is we sort of go straight into the basic principles. And sometimes we'll find that when we do that, we kind of slip into them more easily than we're expecting. Not always. So just thinking about your basic posture, feet below your knees, a third of your weight in your feet, the other 2/3 bearing down through hips and buttocks. And it's not just a physical process. So one of the things that we can lose, we were just talking for the class about, not knowing quite what day it was and things like that, as happens over the Christmas New Year period. So we lose some of that structure that helps with the sort of physical, the case in point, the mental focusing. And just as we want to be gentle with our bodies and just accept that, and quite as much exercise and to go a bit more carefully. So this process of bringing our attention back needs to be a very soft, gentle one. My favorite image of that is from a meditation teacher called Christina Feldman, who talks about sheepdogs herding sheep, and the sheep are being herded towards the fold or whatever they do. Every now and then one of them runs away and the dog goes out and just shivers it back. And so rather than thinking I must concentrate or now I've lost focus again or whatever, just give yourself that little bit of an opportunity. Be kind of gentle. Just accept that after a period, a couple of weeks of relatively unstructured living, getting back into that structure should be a kind of pleasant process rather than one in which you're feeling guilty or whatever. So just rubbing your hands together, tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder and your arm. And on the other side. Upper part of your chest. And the belly. And your legs. So sitting back, really as always in Tai Chi, the sort of primary thing, the foundational thing that we begin to focus on is our relationship with the pull of gravity and finding how we can neutralize that and make use of it rather than finding ourselves kind of at war with it. So this is a good position, the reclining position, to allow that to happen. Just feel as though you're being sort of squashed into the chair, like a cat. Cats will sometimes seem to melt into a chair, and in doing so, they take up a lot more space. You can have a cat, if you have a cat sitting next to you and you're sitting there for half an hour, chances are after a little while the cat will occupy 3/4 of the chair without even trying. And in the same way, this releasing of the tightness and resistance in our bodies to the pull of gravity helps to open up a little bit of space within the body, and the focusing of our attention has the same effect on our thoughts, just little glimpses of a clearer, more open quality in our attention. And just noticing maybe in those moments, physical areas of the body that are resisting that releasing feeling. Maybe any changes to things like breath, circulation, really whatever our attention is drawn to. In the first instance, this is where we learn to rest our attention. Having learned to rest our attention, we then begin to guide it. You know, it's like the sheepdog again. First of all, notices that the sheep is running away and then begins to guide it. You can't do the guidance in any kind of gentle way without the basic awareness that goes with it. When we come back up to the upright position, then we go through the same process again. This is an ongoing thing. It's like, apparently, not that I know much about it, but we're all doing this on Zoom, so we're all on some kind of computer or another. As we sit here, there's loads of little kind of things happening in the background that enable this to happen. We don't know that they're happening, but we'll soon know if they weren't. So something like that, monitoring of our relationship with the pull of gravity, and from that being the rooting down, dropping our center of gravity, kind of chugs along in the background of our awareness, only really coming to the foreground when it starts to fail, when we suddenly realize that we've, I don't know, for the last 10 minutes we've been off on cloud 9 or something like that, or suddenly where we've lost that sense of the whole body and the quality of the movement and so on. But we always start off by refocusing on that. Again, 70% of your weight back in your hips. Feeling that your upper body is supported by your feet, by your hips, but also by your spine and the skeleton in general. And that combination of an awareness of that inner strength, if that's a label for that support that suits you, and the actual physical dropping of our center of gravity, means that we begin to feel just a little bit more comfortable, and maybe just experiencing that sense of spaciousness that I referred to earlier. Try not to think of these as permanent states. They're anything but, in my experience. And try not to think that somehow you're failing when you lose that, because actually the really key thing here is that you're beginning to notice that. And then just turning your head, just registering how far you can turn before you have to sort of push a little bit. And we really don't want to do that pushing. We especially don't want to do it with this exercise because of the physical effect of the pressure on the side of your neck. But just in general, we want to be able to recognize that we're moving within that space, confident that the movement itself will begin to expand that space forward, because it has that quality of massaging, of easing the boundaries, opening up the boundaries a little bit. And then hands in front of your shoulders, circling around. And then going forwards. Just notice how the movement feels. Hands down to your side, rotating your arms. Is the movement smooth? Are there tight areas of tightness, of stiffness? What you may find is, in particularly people with more experience in Tai Chi, that the very act of noticing carries with it an intention to release those areas, and that our bodies just respond to that intention. And then winding your arms around. So people sometimes say that they feel as though they're too stuck in their heads, less aware of their bodies. But in my experience, it's rare, if at all, that there is anybody whose body's totally unresponsive to aspects of mind. In fact, I think it would be very difficult to even sort of open a door or scratch your head if there wasn't some kind of mind-body overlap. And then back the other way. And that responsiveness of our body is something that we are actively working with, I think, in Tai Chi. Rest your hand. Beginning to transfer your weight. So after the alignment and rooting down, the second sort of key physical element is going to be this movement that comes from the ground and from the positioning of our weight. And in terms of the chair-based exercises, the principal positions are with your weight forwards, where you've got maybe 60, perhaps even 70% of your weight in your feet, and going back, and there you've got the 70% back there. And that's creating a movement that is actually very much dependent on the pull of gravity through your body. So once we've managed to align ourselves in such a way that we're less likely to strain against the pull of gravity, not only are we more comfortable, but we actually have a source of energy, because you get drawn down into your legs get compressed, and at a certain point they'll start to push you back. Sink down into your hips, lower back and buttocks, and at a certain point there'll be this little sense of a push up. Remember, we're not straining, so it's almost like, and as you go back into your hips, it's like a seesaw. At a certain point, the balance tips and going down more, and then the balance would tip, and you'll feel your body wanting to push up. And it's important not to force that beyond its particular point. So you go down and you wait for the push up. There might be times when you decide, I'm going to stay here, I'm going to try and go down further, but I would suggest that the wrong time to do that really is the first class after a break. We want to work with what is actually there. Notice that as you go forward, your hips are sinking back, like somebody sitting behind your chair, pulling your hips back. So as your shoulders and your head get pushed forward by the pelvis tilting, there's an extension through your spine. Then as you go back, as you come to the upright, the weight of your head and full of gravity, a slight compression there. So we have this mechanism spring, the springiness of the legs pushing you back, the springiness of the hips, lower back and spine, buttocks, pushing you forwards. Now that we've got that, or as we begin to recognize that on occasion, now we can bring, in a way, I suppose what you could call a kind of more definite intent. We want to bring a sense of direction into this, and we do it through the center of the body. You turn in the center, like you've got a little spotlight in your navel towards one knee, and you go forward into that knee. Still those same basic mechanisms are there. You may notice slight changes. So you may notice here that, for instance, that extension and contraction in your upper body I talked about in terms of the spine, that's a bit more noticeable in the side of your body, the side away from the way that you're moving. Reminding yourself that you can pay attention to these details. So then turning the other way. So now that we can begin to identify the patterns of movement within our body, then again we can bring our conscious, our deliberate intention in. I'm here, I'm going forward, there's a pressure, there's a push coming up from the legs, there's a pull coming from the extension, and I use those movements to bring me across in one direction and then similarly going back. So now, rather than imposing a circular movement, thinking, well, I've got to make a circle, I'm just thinking, well, where are the appropriate, shall we call them, mechanisms, the compressions, the extensions, that if they change, if I allow them to change appropriately, will move me to where I want to go. Go back the other way. Just notice what's going on. I think movements like this can be very, very absorbing as your attention goes more deeply. Notice tiny little changes within the body. There's an element of discovery, I think, here. Coming back to the center, to this area, space of equilibrium, and then stepping out. And then on the other side, planting the foot. And repeat that. So these are the elements, or some of the elements, I should say, really, that will build into the movement. And once they're there, we begin to work them, we realize that they're very open in the sense that they don't dictate this is what it should be. It's not always the case that when I'm here, if I allow the contraction here and the push here, I will go across to there. Sometimes I might go back this way. Other times I might choose to go this way, or whatever. So the fundamentals in Tai Chi allow for a massive variation in the expression of those ideas. And the different exercises illustrate that and help us to realize that. So hands down to your sides. Bird folds its wings. So a very strong emphasis in Tai Chi is often placed on the notion of emptying, of non-resistance to the forces that are acting on the body, yielding to those forces. And there are very, very good Tai Chi schools out there that focus almost entirely on them, often for the first 10, 20 years. I know people from those schools, they're good Tai Chi players. But this is not simply going with the flow. We can introduce the notion of intention, of choice for these movements. And with this particular exercise, the intention is to maintain the line of our arms directly down from the shoulders, to rotate our arms, but not to try to move them forward, to let our weight move them forwards. I'm doing it with one arm because I've got a back to the chair here that I can't really do the move. So one of the things that we learn from this is the significance of the weight change. That it's one of the driving forces coming out of that relationship with the pull of gravity and with the ground beneath us, the movement between the two. When we start to move the weight, our whole body begins to move and to respond. Now when we change to fisherman castanet, we allow the arms a little bit more freedom to swing. We don't force the movement into place. And the arm will come up here. What I don't want to do is say, right, the arm's going to go back. I move my weight back. I sort of let my arm drop. You see how my arm swings? I go forward. I let my arm drop. Only it's done slower than that. That belies how difficult that is. I've often been in a situation, you're playing around with these ideas. Somebody helps you, you're working with a partner, they'll raise your arm up, and you say, "Oh, that's nice," and then they'll just let go. And instead of your arm dropping down, your arm will stay there. You think, well, why's my arm still there? Because it's very difficult to get that sense of release. So the partner, the yang to the yin, if you like, of the emptying is the filling. As I said, this is not just going with the flow. There's an intention to let your arms swing. There's an intention to maintain the connection between your arms and fingers and the movement of your weight. You're aware of the connections that are there already inherently within the movement. And of course, you're aware of the exercise, the shape of the move. Next, we come to the exercise rolling the ball. Again, this should be done with both arms, hands in front of you. And then you imagine the ball there, and you simply come back. You maintain the position of your arm. Don't try and lift it to begin with. Think of the angle between your arm and your side, and keep that angle there. And as you go back, unless there's a reason not to, your hand will follow over. And then what will happen is you get to here, your elbow drops, and that brings your hand up more. Again, this is not simply going with the flow. There's an intention there. And that leads you to an awareness again of subtle changes within the body. Feeling the here, for instance, as I go back, an expansion in belly, solar plexus, chest, underneath the arms, like a wave coming up. Growing awareness of movement of energy within the body. So it's by no means effortless, but it's quite often not the effort that we think we need to make that makes the exercise. And then turning the hands, palm in, pigeon spreads its wings. Here, for me, a noticeable feature is going to be the expansion and contraction in my chest. And from that, I also begin to recognize the expansion and contraction in my upper back. My belly. And all of these are things that we want to cultivate, or potentially things that we want to cultivate. I might also notice that I'm putting a bit of effort in with my shoulders. I'm tightening my shoulders. That's not something I would want to cultivate. So now we bring a very discerning quality into this. I want to feel the chest expanding and contracting more. I don't want to increase the tension in my shoulders. And then pushing wave. A little technical issue there. With pushing wave, we also start to get a stronger idea. There's an intent to push, and yet we still want to bring in that softer quality, that idea of following the path of least resistance, for instance. Think of pushing into water. And if you were to sort of, if you're in water, you can't stop doing that. You'll meet far more resistance than if you can get that sense of softening through your body, that sense of releasing through your body. And then punch with both fists. Open your fingers and changing. And chest opens, contracts, back opens, and that opening of the back seems to push you forward. Imagine you were standing or leaning back against a wall, and then you decided it was time to move on. You might actually give yourself a little sort of push against the wall to push yourself forwards. Not not a completely accurate image, but there's an element of that, particularly in the lower part of your back. And the push isn't backwards, unless you're leaning right back against the chair. That little sort of movement downwards is actually downwards into the chair, into the ground. One more time. And then polishing the table. And the spine extends out. There's that sense of compression, not an unpleasant feeling in your legs. That reverses. The legs expand. Compression down through your back. See if you can just feel that tipping point, one to the other. Don't force it. Don't resist it. Last time. And then turning your hands palm up. Expanding and contracting. Mostly now through that 70% of your weight going down through your back, hips and buttocks. But still your legs are very much part of the movement. If you're finding that your back's beginning to ache, then sit back, because that mechanism simply isn't going to be working under those circumstances in any case. Again, we have this sense of movement opposing there. Just as we start to feel that sense of expansion upwards, we're aware that we're essentially pushing downwards through our hips and through our feet. Pushing is perhaps too strong a term, not quite the right term. That's why this exercise is called rooting down, because it relates to that idea of rooting, of the dropping of our center of gravity. It shows us that that movement is actually the thing that initiates all movement in Tai Chi. We sink down, and we're not losing connection with the root any more than a plant that grows up out of the ground is disconnected from its roots. In fact, if anything, expanding movement reinforces that. And change into the wild goose. and parting the clouds. Here your weight goes forward very slightly. And across in front of your belly. So you sink back and down into your hips. Wait until you feel the push up. I'm told, I don't know because I've never been surfing, but I'm told this is what surfers do. They don't look out and think, oh, that looks like a good wave. Maybe I'll ride that one. They feel the movements. They feel the currents. On time. And the changeover is very simple. You get to here, you just let your hands drop down, and then the next wave of expansion we feel, we use that, move one arm. Dragon plucks the stance. More time on each side. And then changing, pushing in two directions. Hands out now, 1 foot out, knees still bent, scooping the seed, looking at the sky. Slightly stronger exercise, so just listen to your back. How far is it appropriate to go? You don't want to start the year by straining your back in your first Tai Chi class. I certainly don't. It's actually my second one for the year. But and then grasping the tiger's ear. And then on the other side, on the foot, scooping the sea, looking at the sky. And grasping the tiger's ear. Come back to setting. Yeah. Rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. One shoulder. The other side. Upper part of your chest. Down to your belly. And folding your legs. Pushing your heels up. And then back the other way. Okay, and then standing. So I spent a long time, longer than normal, on the seated exercises, really bringing your attention back each time to those fundamental principles. And you know, bring your memory back to the very start of the class. We sat and then we sat back. We established the support from the chair in large part, but also in other elements of that actually enabled us to build the rest of the movements, that enabled that spaciousness, that movement, and would also help with the focusing of our attention. So the first thing that we have to do when we come into any part of Tai Chi, whether it's seated or standing, a simple exercise or a form, or partner work if you're interested in the martial side, is to establish what is supporting you. And obviously the ground is going to be a key part of that. And your relationship between the trinity of the pull of gravity and the ground that it's pulling you into, and your body in between the two. One of the ways of describing this is in the phrase that we're suspended between heaven and earth. We're the kind of conduit, if you like. So having your feet hip width apart, we have the feet hip width apart because that's too narrow, too uncomfortable. Toes pointing forwards as much as possible, so there's a sense in which everything in your body is moving towards a real precision. Don't just stand like this and think, oh, what shall I do now? Use that focused attention to help you with a more precise movement and vice versa. And simply begin to rock your weight forwards and backwards. Now, if you're feeling a bit wobbly, you can't quite get that sense of stability that comes from the rooting down. It's been a couple of weeks, so we will lose that. Hold on to something. Put your hand on a wall or the chair or something like that, just to give yourself the reassurance that you're not going to fall over. It's perfectly reasonable to be concerned that you might just fall. Nobody wants to do that. I don't want you to do that. And give yourself the environment within which you can begin to feel how your body's responding to the pull of gravity. So, for instance, and this is only a for instance, you don't necessarily going to feel it like this. I roll my weight forwards. I want to keep my heels on the ground, so my calf muscles are being pulled out a little bit. Not uncomfortably so, but now I get to hear, now they're tightening, and I'm also a bit kind of wobbly, and so on and so forth. So we begin to recognize the signs, just as we might, if you drive a car, if you ride a bike, if you boil a kettle, we begin to recognize the signs that we're approaching a kind of pivot point, that point where the seesaw dips. Same thing going back, and I would feel it in the thighs going back. But it's really about what you're feeling, and just recognizing that this isn't some kind of magical technique that means you can stand up with no effort. Sometimes Tai Chi is described as effortless, which is obviously ridiculous. But what it is a very different kind of effort to how we would normally think. So wherever you felt those responses in your body, focusing on them and letting them come to a kind of neutral point. This is bringing the seesaw not to one side or the other, but trying to adjust it at either end so that it stays horizontal, so that we stay vertical in this case. And then just rather than forwards and backwards, letting the hips drop down a little bit and feeling that push up. In the chair-based exercises, there was an alternation between legs expanding, spine expanding. These are the first two springs of the body. When they're standing like this, when we're standing like this, actually those two springs ideally will work in harmony. It's like somebody's pushing down on your head and you feel the compression in your spine and in your legs, and then at a certain point the tipping point is reached and you come up again. So running out of time. So bring your hands around in front of you. Let's do these three exercises as a little sequence. So rooting down. So we can begin to see how when we're aware of these basic principles, changing now to the wild goose. They're applicable, the principles and the expression of those principles, parting the clouds, can be applied in many different ways to many different patterns. In fact, to everything that happens, I think, in the Tai Chi system. Exactly how they relate to each other, how they work for our body, our mind, depends on circumstances that we're in. Do one more round of this. Okay, now, from one foot out, have the other foot forwards. Transferring your weight. This time the transfer is very definitely from one foot, one leg to another. So again, we feel the compression and the expansion. I think of this as the exercise that really shows us how we can take what can feel sometimes like quite obscure, abstract ideas and principles, the kind of thing I've been talking about, into something that is very relevant to our daily lives. The transfer of the weight, as we're going to say, is key to our mobility, whether it's in the chair or whether it's standing. Traditionally, of course, these exercises will be taught standing. If you bring your weight into your back foot and gently raise your front toes, more of your weight goes into this leg. You have the front foot turned down. You go forwards, push your back knee forwards, your heel comes up, more of the weight goes in to your front leg until eventually we can get to a point where there's so little weight left in the empty leg, as we would call it, that we can again begin to take a step without having to hurry, without jerking. And again, you can always hold on to something here for that extra support. The empty leg, as we would call it, contracts and expands. We plant the foot and so on and so forth. Try that on the other side. I'm going through this very quickly because I've talked far too much in the first part of the class. It's just to show really the significance of these things that we do in the chair-based exercises, how we can bring those into our lives and into just our everyday lives, you know, walking down the shops, moving from one room to another to put the kettle on. Learning how to maintain mobility, stability, how we can make use of the gravity, the yielding, and so on and so forth. Just raising the toes and the heel. And then stepping in. Stepping through. So just taking a few steps forwards or backwards as carefully as you can. Changing direction. Always being aware that this is a very difficult exercise. One thing, step quickly. You don't even notice maybe that you're overbalancing a bit, losing stability, overextending, but going slowly, every little kind of lack of alignment, every little part of the route is amplified. So don't be surprised if you're wobbling around and don't see it as a failure. Bringing your feet parallel. Okay, so go back to your chair. So coming back to sitting, just giving yourself a chance to feel what it's like to sit in this state of equilibrium. Required, your intent. What are the indications that you're there? What are the indications that you're starting to lose that a little bit? Let your hands drop to your side. Embrace tiger, return to the mountain. Extending out, drawing back in. Seeing if you can just feel that point, that what I described as a tipping point, where yang, the extension, changes to yin, the contraction. Can we move with that rather than against it? Once again, if you like, think of it as the seesaw principle. One more round. And lovely, and just open your eyes. So we will get back into doing more standing exercises, but I really wanted to take a fresh look in a way at these absolute basics that we cover in Tai Chi. It can be lost sometimes in the complexity of some of the movements. So thank you very much, everyone.